Hello, I'm Krista McAllister, and welcome to Cerius Leadership. Whether you are growing your business, growing your career, or possibly both, thank you for joining us. My guest today has dedicated his career to helping leaders create peak performing, self-managed teams by fostering empathy, meaningful connections, and purpose-driven goals. Tulio Zaragoza. Tulio, thank you so much for joining me.
It's my pleasure, Kristen. Thank you for having me.
I'm excited to get in this because there's a couple of topics that I really enjoy discussing right now in today's leadership, and especially with the multi-generational workforce. And a lot of content out there right now is on leadership EQ. I want to start with some basis on how you define really that empathy and emotional intelligence in the context of today's leadership.
One could say the newer generations want more inclusivity and want to be validated and heard. They want more meaning behind what they're doing. They want to belong to something greater than themselves. They want to be able to make an impact and ultimately want to be becoming. These are the four key elements that matter, not just to this newer generation, but really to all of us. Some of the older ones, we might have been okay with sacrificing those ideals. We had a slightly different mindset, which lacked a lot of emotional intelligence. It was more of a command and control type of world. You got to get what you got to get done. And so the leadership corralled around this idea of performing at all stakes, even if it meant self-sacrifice. So for me, emotional intelligence and empathy is really about meeting the needs of individuals and synergizing that in such a way where a team can collaborate and produce peak performance results without anyone feeling like they're having to do what they don't want to do. So it's about synergizing the best of everyone, uh, focus on the things they love doing it as a team, and collaborating in such a way that it's not dependent on one individual. And this is including across the leadership as well. So it's a dramatic shift in context in terms of how you lead, rather than be top down. It's a collaborative, shared authority based on equivalence model that has proven to be not only really good for people, but there are data points that suggest that companies that operate this way are usually 10x or more profitable than organizations that don't.
All right, you just mentioned something that we've seen leaders struggle with, including founders, and that's command and control tends to be the default because it's easy. One size fits all. You just said it's about customization. It's about the individual. When you've got 300, 400, 5 individuals in an organization, what does that look like? Leading with empathy and being able to take all of those individual needs and desires to be part of the whole when you're leading that.
I think it's important to distinguish that command and control is actually quite easy. Uh, it's not really leadership. It's just telling people what to do. And it's usually based on the idea that you have that power because you have a title. It's not earned. There's no respect there. It's a coercion. It's a forced approach to leading. What I'm talking about is this idea of two principles. One, zero force, which means you can't force anyone to do anything. You can't coerce people to do anything. You can't manipulate people to do anything. And two, absolute accountability. You can't have this kind of collaborative environment without absolute accountability. So, which means that everyone operates like an adult. The reality is we have employees that make very difficult decisions in their lives: who to marry, where to buy a home, whether to buy a home, whether to have children. These are really life-altering decisions. And these are adults perfectly capable of making those decisions. So in the context of business, we ought to have a similar respect for individuals that can make those decisions. If they're empowered with the right information, there's enough transparency and visibility into what is needed, people will rise to the occasion to get those things done. So it's really about inspiring people and enrolling people, which is true definition of leadership, versus just telling people what to do because you have a title. Now, In this kind of environment, hierarchy still happens, but it happens organically because it's who's willing to serve the most that gets followed. So it's very natural to follow someone who's willing to serve others. So it is earned. It is something that becomes organic, not because I have a title. And so what happens is you have people highly engaged and committed to supporting each other because they feel like they're being taken care of and their needs are being met.
We talk a lot about employee engagement and enrolling individuals and getting their commitment. It's usually to the organization. You just mentioned, no, it's to each other.
Yes, but it's also driven by something greater. So there's a purpose that drives and leads the organization. So that's the key element to make this work. The purpose is something that ties the entire mission of the organization towards something that is greater than the sum of one. So you have to be driven by something. So it's either a leader who tells you what to do or a purpose defines what you're going to do. And it's different from defining a mission because your mission is what you do and how you go about supporting your purpose. Now, a lot of organization will say, well, our purpose is to create shareholder value. Well, that could be, and that's a lower consciousness purpose, which is limited, or creating shareholder value is part of the mission towards a greater purpose that actually has an impact on the world. So, in order to continue to make an impact on the world based on a purpose, then you obviously want to create shareholder value because you need money to create value. You need that money to continue to pursue your purpose. So, it's elevating the consciousness of the organization, and then that purpose becomes the driving force, the boss, so to speak, inside of the company. And everyone's led by that purpose, from executives all the way to anyone in the organization. So that purpose is what replaces the quote unquote CEO. And everyone can then step into being a leader towards fulfilling that purpose.
It's something that I see so many companies and leaders struggling with right now is that purpose. And you mentioned it's a higher conscious, almost an EQ driven versus a business goal driven purpose. And we know the newest generation in the workforce is very purpose driven. They're not just talking about, hey, tell me about your culture in an interview. What's the purpose of the organization? And leaders are really struggling with how to convey, because they're going, what am I driven by? What's my purpose? What advice would you give for owners, CEOs, leadership to say, here's some ways to think about creating that purpose and communicating it?
The thing I've discovered is that often in environments that doesn't have a purpose, where it's completely driven by profits and shareholder value, you have leaders who come to the office with a mask on. What I mean by that is they're kind and sweet at home with their family, and then when they come to work, they feel they have to put on this hardcore boss, drive everybody, grind everybody kind of mindset. And it's exhausting. It's exhausting. It's a duplicity way of being. It's a duplicitous way of being. Most of us have bought into that over many, many generations because we feel, well, that's what we have to do to survive. It's that dog eat dog mindset. Again, it's a lower consciousness mindset. It's a survivalist mindset. What most leaders don't realize when they're operating in that context, they're operating in a survivalist mindset. That's not a thriving mindset. That is basically a way to avoid failing. So they'll push hard and do what they have to do to survive and ultimately thrive. So the challenge in shifting that context is realizing that we're all human, and we're, no matter whether you're a B2B company or a B2C company or B2B2C company or direct to consumer company, we are all in the people to people business. There are people on the other side who are buying your product. There are people on the other side who are your partners, whether they're your financial partners, your investors. There are people who are making things happen in your employee base. We're all people. And so without the human element, without empathy, without understanding that we're not just driven by the desire to fulfill transactions, we're not machines. we're driven by the desire for experiences. So that mindset shift can help someone rethink, how am I serving my employees? How am I serving my clients? When you begin to do that, then you begin to think differently because it's not just about meeting the need immediately for that transaction. And a lot of companies have on their board of directors committees for all kinds of things, but there's no committee in any of these organizations for the employee satisfaction, right? They'll track the score of client satisfaction, but often enough there's not a score for employee satisfaction, and that score would tell you how those leaders are doing, whether they're being abusive or whether they're being the kind of leader that inspires people. And I often say, if you struggle with tapping into that empathy, volunteer. Go volunteer your time. Don't just give money. Volunteer your time towards a cause that has nothing of value to you. It puts you completely out of yourself to do something for someone else. And if you do it long enough, you will activate that empathy because you'll begin to see the human element of everything. When you see struggle, you see an opportunity to make a difference. And so it's a shift. Now, it's not something that happens overnight. And there's a lot of fear to moving into that direction. So one of the things that I've adopted is creating a way for organizations to step into that in such a way that still maintains visibility and transparency at the top, which still allows the top to influence the organization, not completely, okay, we're going to self-manage, go run the business. That's not how it works. So what I've done is I've created a model where we do these bottom-up OKRs, which are collaboratively driven. Instead of having owners, we have champions and we have teams that work on these OKRs together. We create a model where people can be observers. So if you're in a part of the organization that has nothing to do with that problem that's being solved, you can still be part of that team to observe because you want to learn, you want to expand your knowledge base, you want to be part of something greater than yourself, you want to have an opportunity to grow, you want to be able to make an impact even in something you have never done before. So it gets people to collaborate and be part of the organization. And often some incredible innovation and wisdom comes out of people you would have least expected it from. So it opens up the organization to talk to each other, collaborate on a mission that's tied to a purpose. And then the leadership team becomes really more of a mentor, a coach towards those teams that are working to solve the company's challenges. And so as you do that over a couple of quarters, you begin to shift from I have to make all the decision pushing down the organization to I'm going to let the team make the decision based on what is needed. I'm going to transparently expose where we are, what's going on, and I'm going to trust that the collective wisdom of this team that's equally invested as I am, because I'm giving them that investment, I'm empowering them to make that investment, are going to come up with the right solution. And guess what happens when those teams are defining those solutions? There's instant adoption because you don't have to go sell to make a change. They're the ones driving it. So there's no, let's make a decision. Now we have to go through the change management of that decision. We have to get the organization on board with that decision. The organization's on board from day one because they are defining it. So as leaders begin to see that transformation, often they realize they get their life back a little bit too, because they realize I can actually do the things I love doing now because all this other stuff that I felt I had to do is being taken care of. So there's a mutual benefit that takes place. And, usually it's a couple of quarters. Within a year, it's a significant shift in transformation. And then what companies do, they work so much faster and get so much more done. It's really magical when you see it happening. In a year's time, I've seen organization completely transformed.
It can. And you mentioned right there the leadership, they're shifting how they're spending their time and what they're focusing on from having all the answers, because we feel like we need to have all the answers and then go tell our team what to do. And it's that mindset shift from, I don't need to have the answers. I just need to tell my team what to solve for. Where
And
are we
sometimes,
headed?
even if you do have the answers, I encourage holding them back because once you've solved it, you've taken away the opportunity for people to connect to that solution, not just in their mind, but in their heart. And that's what we're trying to do is create a connection between the mind and the heart. The heart is what's going to drive someone's desire to get something done. The mind logically, rationally tells you this is what should be done, but do I want to do it? So when you get an organization that's top down, they tell you this is what should be done. So it makes sense, it's rational, it's logical. But have the people connected to it with their heart? Do they want to do it? So by involving the people in the process, then they want to do it. And so you create this connection between both spheres, the rational mind and the emotional side of things. And as leaders begin to do that, they begin to also loosen up a little bit and realize that they can be human and vulnerable, and there's power in that, and there's intimacy that gets created. And in that intimacy is where the magic happens. That's where those teams become unstoppable.
I call them teams into tribes. And part of
Yeah.
that, you mentioned kind of four pillars earlier. That they feel belonging, there's meaning to what they're doing, they feel like they're making an impact. And there was a fourth one there. I think I missed
To
that.
be becoming, the
To be becoming.
opportunity to grow.
Whether it's the team, those leading the team, you also mentioned service that, and I see that pattern amongst just humans in general saying, I want to know that I'm making an impact. I want to know that I still have a contribution to give to those out there. And I'm hearing that come across quite a bit in what you're talking about is people need to be that collaboration, they're contributing. They're contributing
Yes.
to the solution. They're contributing to the impact. They're contributing saying, I helped do that.
And the other thing I've discovered is if you redefine, for example, if you've not done it, you should do this as an organization, define your company's values, which then will inform your purpose. Uh, but do it bottom up. Get individuals to share their own purpose, their own focus area, their own ways of wanting to be and live their lives. And then what ends up happening is through the amalgamation of all the different inputs, you begin to see the commonality between everyone and how much people are very similar and how they have very similar desires as well. So when you begin to do that, then the purpose and the values gets informed from the entire organization. It's very proud to be able to say when they hire someone new and saying, "Oh, who defined this purpose for the company? Who defined these values? Where did this come from?" And anyone in the organization can say, "I did that. Those are my values. That aligns with my purpose. I and everyone else here define this." And it's very powerful to have that because then there's ownership, not just, mentally, logically, and rationally, but in the heart, emotionally, people become attached. So it's very important to not just collaborate on the stuff that needs to get done, but take the time to collaborate in redefining who we are as an organization. What are the values that we care about? What are we trying to do in the world that's good? And align it to the individuals that make up that organization. Let them define it. It's it's a very different dynamic once you have that in place because then anything that happens is, I have ownership. I defined it. It's me who defined it. It wasn't a few folks at the top who said this is who we are. I may not connect with that, but I definitely connect with something that I had a part in to defining.
It reminds me of one of the, I guess, the pillars also that you talk about, and that's building love into a scalable system with the acronym of BLISS. I want to get into that a little bit. As what I hear from leaders a lot is it's either or. If we are empathy driven, if we're purpose driven, if we care, we're customizing it to the individuals, we're not thinking about the whole, and that's not scalable. I'm not going to be profitable. I'm
Yeah,
not going to hit the numbers.
I don't know where people are getting that data from because if they'd actually dig into some real data that's from companies like Deloitte and McKinsey and others that have done studies on this, the organization that operate this way over a 10, 15-year period or 1,300x more profitable. over a period of just a few years, some of them are 7 to 10x more profitable. So it's not just good for people, it's a good business model. It's a very ROI driven business model. So people that think that this is a risk are actually not fully tuned into what's going on out there and how to tap into a model that actually outperforms anything else. And the mind, it's a very simple thing, right? If I don't realize that everything is done by people and those people have needs, and those basic needs are those four things we just talked about. Those are defined. A bunch of us crazies created radicalpurpose.org, and it was a bunch of sociocracy, teal practitioners, Morningstar practitioners, World Blue. These are all self-management system. And then we had a bunch of psychologists, and we did tremendous research over a period of almost 2.5 years on what is truly needed to have highly engaged organization. And we landed on these four tenets. Everybody wants to belong to something greater than themselves. That's why religion and politics is so big. Everyone wants to have meaning behind what they're doing. That's why activism and causes are so big. Everybody wants to make an impact. That's why people participate on those things and take up leadership roles and volunteer. And everybody wants to be becoming. That's why the self-improvement industry is what, $1 trillion now? So when you define everything within the organization to meet those four needs, there's love needed to do that. You have to love people because you're trying to empower those individuals to fulfill their own purpose in their own lives. And the idea is that when you do that, and you can connect it to the organizational's purpose, then there's a symbiotic relationship that takes place. And you end up also attracting people that want to and believe in the same principles you do. So you end up with a environment of highly motivated individuals who resonate with each other. And that resonance creates intimacy and trust. And you can have very difficult conversations a lot easier in that environment because you're operating as a friendship. And that's the thing I always encourage. Don't think of your company as a family. That's a mistake. Uh, we don't get to choose our family, and some family members are people we don't necessarily want to spend time with. But you get to choose your friends. And what are true friends like? Well, they do three things. They celebrate each other. They rely on each other when things get difficult. And the third is they call each other out when one has fallen off track. That's what a true friend does, right? So in an environment where the employees are operating this way, there's intimacy. To achieve that, you can't be top down. You have to have an environment that gets people involved, gets people to have co-ownership in the direction of the company, and lets them step into that leadership. The job of a leader is to create other leaders. That's it. And how do you do that is the big question. I just happen to have stumbled on a model that allows an organization to scale that, to do that at scale. But ultimately, it's got to be driven by love. You have to love wanting to serve people for their own growth. It's got to be something of a mission for yourself. And most of us will connect to that mission once we step away from that grind of that command and control fiat environment that most of us are kind of living into. Because the reality is it's actually just a lens. We've put on these lenses and we see the reality through these lenses, but it's not real. And we just keep perpetuating this reality that's not real because the real reality is predicated on the desire to be loving and kind to one another. So when you take those lenses off, you step into the real reality, which is one that says we ought to work collaboratively, we ought to work and support each other to grow, and that creates unstoppable teams.
I had a fun conversation on this recently. You talk about friendships and attraction, and my son's 11 going into middle school. And we had this conversation on IQ and EQ and what's the difference between the two. And that was the simplest way I could explain EQ is being aware of others' feelings and what you say and how it impacts. I said, it's like you're able to attract more friends. People want to be around you, they want to be your friend when you're considering their emotions. And that's a tough thing sometimes in business because when we done it a different way for 20, 30 years, more of that command and control, it's difficult to
Oh,
then
this has
think
been
of
going
it
on
from
for
an
thousands of
attraction.
years.
But from an 11-year-old's perspective, he goes, Mom, this is a no-brainer. I can talk to anyone you need me to at your work. This is 11. He said, think of it this way, Mom. An okay company that can attract everyone to it is 1,000 times better than an amazing company that can't attract anyone. So they need to work more on attracting people, not what they're making or doing. And I went, from the eyes of a child, this
Well,
is
it's true because you see, they're more connected. The younger you are, the more connected you are to nature and the natural order of things. I mean, if we just look at nature itself, we've disconnected from the way nature does things. I mean, what does nature do? It is in constant service unto itself. It is in constant service unto itself. It never holds back. The sun shines and benefits everything else. The water, it rains, the everything is in constant service to itself. And there's no small or big part. There's no one who's, bees do their part. Everything's part of the ecosystem, right? There's no one saying I'm more important than you. The sun doesn't turn around and says, well, I'm more important than all of you, right? Because it's all interdependent. And that's the key thing. The business models of today, most of them, the command and control models, they're codependent models. And then there's some who's like, oh, well, we should create independent models. Those are not good either because we're
yes.
part of the whole. So what I'm talking about here is creating interdependence. And your son as a child understands that because they're more closely tied to the way the natural order of thing is. Then over time, trauma, all these things kick in. We start to protect ourselves, put up the walls, and try to survive in either codependent models or independent models, try to make our way. But in reality, nature is interdependent. All we have to do is just get back to how nature is. We're part of nature. If we operate that way in all that we do in our business dealings and everything, uh, you just can't stop a team that works that way.
It's an incredible connectivity. And you mentioned earlier on self-managed teams, there's a lot of information that's coming out. Just about daily, I'm pulling up news articles. It reminds me of McKinsey. You mentioned the large consulting firms have been doing a lot of research over the past couple of years on this. And they put out a white paper called From Me to We. It's no
Mm-hmm.
longer about the individual, it's about the teams. And the 5 different ways that organizations are going to need to change or reorganize in order to go from it's about the individual to it's about the whole. And one of those was fostering outcome-based performance in small cross-functional teams.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that goes into the small cross-functional self-managed teams. Every single team does not need a leader, a manager. They just need champions.
Absolutely.
They need to know what they're looking to accomplish. So kind of double clicking into this, the self-managed teams, what do you feel are some of the key things that organizations can maybe dip their toe into? The automatic thing is I just I don't see my company capable of this. There's no way that anyone's going to be able to get outside of their individualistic mindset. I think there are some ways that we can test it. I recently heard someone say you don't need to build software in order to test the software. We don't need to completely transform overnight, but we can start dipping our toe in and testing this kind of self-managed, give them an outcome and let them solve for it. Let them tap into that creativity and the collaboration to solve for it. What are some ways you've seen this done in organizations?
Do it in parts of the organization. Pick a department and test it. Um, give that, let them say, share what is needed in the organization, share the key goals for the quarter, and then let a department say, okay, this is an area we can contribute in. And then let them define how they're going to create the results around those objectives, what activities they're going to do. Let them define it together and then create visibility for it and have them meet like on an agile basis every week to do stand up to see red, yellow, green flag, how they're progressing as a team towards that goal. and let them operate that way from the beginning of establishing all the parameters for that goal all the way to the end, and then see how that turns out. And then add another department and share it and do it across the organization. You don't have to do it all at once. You can do it in pockets, especially if you're a big company. If you're a company with less than 100 employees, this is a lot easier to implement. But the best way to do it is just change the way you go about pursuing goals. Number one, bring everybody into the conversation. If you're too big of an organization to bring everybody into it, then have department heads come into the conversation, and then let them have all of the other conversation with their teams. Create an environment where there's radical transparency and openness, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Just be open about what's going on and get people to contribute their ideas and let them take calculated risks. But the most important thing is if they fail at it, don't retaliate. This is a learning process. So it
Agreed.
takes time and the willingness to just include other people into it. And it's tied to a very simple principle. When we're raising children, if we show them that we don't believe in them, they will fail drastically. They will grow up with lack of self-worth, lack of self-esteem, afraid to do anything. And we have stories of that, where children that were like critical parents that didn't believe in them end up having to go through a lot of therapy. So it's important to show that you believe in someone. That's probably the biggest, most important trait as a leader, is to show that you believe in someone. So when we don't allow teams to define how they're going to work, how are they going to help solve a problem, it is showing that we don't believe in them, because we're saying only a few of us can decide what needs to happen and the rest of you just need to comply. So what happens is compliance versus innovation that comes out of believing in someone that they're capable. That's why we hired them, right? And then trusting them to get it done and allowing them to go through the motion to get it done. And being that coach, that mentor along the way. When someone's asking for an answer, don't give the answer. Ask another question so that they can come to the answer. So it's a transition. And I often equate it to raising children. Not that I'm suggesting you treat employee like children, but you show respect and support them and empower them the way you would with children. Ultimately, what is the job of a parent? To prepare a child to be an independent, well-adjusted adult. Well, get your team to be independent, well-adjusted adults by empowering them to make the choices they need to make. Here's the good news. They're already adults. They want this. They're ready for this. All you got to do is just get out of the way and enable it. So it's not like you have to train them to get there. People know how to get there. They're there. They make difficult decisions every day. So it's a matter of trusting that the collective wisdom of everybody will make that happen. Now, a key thing that's important in this, you have to create a model for accountability. So one of the things that in self-managed teams is there are collaborative agreements that are put in place between the employees and those teams. So it's important to define that. How are you going to operate, how they're going to operate with each other, to actually have a formal agreement between me and my peer on how I'm going to support him or her and vice versa. So
What
it
would be
makes
some
it more like
examples?
legitimate, you know?
Yeah, what would be some examples of that you've seen teams come up with those almost an operating agreement?
Well, for example, we at Zero Company, we just moved into pods. Teams are moving into pods. So the collaborative agreement will say something along the lines of the response time when someone needs something, and you know how fast you commit to turning
Mhm.
things around. How are you going to support each other to get the work done? It could also include that maybe a pod of four. One individual is going to focus on one area a lot more than another. So there's an agreement about how that's going to get set up. What happens if I want to take vacation? There's an agreement that the team will cover those accounts while I'm on vacation. So it could be very granular to those level, and letting the team define those agreement amongst themselves is key too. You can create a framework, but let them, finalize it. And it's thinking more like a partnership would think,
Mhm.
in a partnership, that's kind of what they do. They have agreements amongst each other to operate a certain way. So It's just bringing that to the entire organization.
And since more companies than not don't have core values as a whole, would you encourage the teams to come up with their own core values? Yeah, it creates a really good accountability to one of our core values was to be respectful of ideas, whether they're good or bad. I didn't feel that I was being respected in that moment. You're not calling out someone that they did something wrong. You're calling out, we weren't aligned with our core values in that moment.
This is the thing, Kristen. When you are in a command and control environment, everyone is just focused on trying to impress the boss. So you get defensive to make sure you look good with the boss. And so it's a competitive mindset on making sure I look good. So if someone makes a comment, it could be felt like a criticism. Now I have to defend myself. I don't want the boss to think I'm not good, right? So there's all these games that take place in order to look good with the boss. We're just trying to please the boss. When you eliminate all that, then we can just be people. There's no one I need to impress. I just need to do a good job because I'm accountable to you and you are accountable to me. We support each other. There's no one trying to win someone over. There's no one trying to impress anyone. So the minute you eliminate that, all those conflicts, they go away. Not maybe overnight, because it takes time for people to actually trust that this is the new paradigm. But once they fully step into that, I've seen it takes about 2 quarters. Like there's just intimacy. And I can tell someone and say, hey, listen, this is not working. What can I do to help you fix this? Right. And there's an openness because I trust you that you got my interest at heart. You're not trying to throw me on the bus because you're trying to jockey for position with the boss. You're just really interested in making sure that we succeed as a team. And I'm equally interested. So maybe I fell off track because I didn't want to, I didn't pay attention or didn't realize I was off track. So I appreciate that you told me, hey, let's get back on track. How can I help you? So it's a different mindset that takes place. It's a friendship model, right? Versus I'm just trying to make daddy or mommy happy. Uh, that's not sustainable. That's where a lot of organizations have disengaged employees.
It comes to pure accountability. You're accountable to your peers, not necessarily to the boss who's hiring, firing, performance review, promotion, etc. It's about the peer group that matters.
Absolutely. And ultimately, you're accountable to your purpose. I think you can equate it to this idea of the Constitution in the United States. Ultimately, all the politicians, if they're doing their job, they are accountable to the Constitution. So that becomes the guiding principle for everything. So it's really creating a model where the accountability is to each other, but ultimately we're accountable to a purpose that we're trying to fulfill that we have all collectively agreed to is the guiding star for what we do every day.
What do you see as some of the most common, probably maybe the most common resistance from leaders who are so used to the leading is managing, managing is leading. I need to task them what to do versus tell them what to solve for. What's maybe a common resistor and how we can overcome it?
I think the biggest resistor is having been sort of raised with the mindset that you climb the ladder to get to the top, and that's when you've made it, and then you have to maintain your position at the top. So there's a little bit of this thing that was sold to many of us that that power, that prestige is when you've made it. So you become protective of that. So the thinking, what you're now saying that I have to share that power and decentralize that power, but I just spent 30 years getting here. Now I've got to give all that up. It's not an easy thing to do, right? It's a mindset. But the reality is, if you really dig into that, whoever got to that place, they're actually not as free as they thought they would be because
I I
they're
hear
not
that
free at
from
all.
founders every day of in pursuit of this, I sacrificed this.
Yeah,
It's usually
you
their own
actually
self-worth
lose your
and
freedom
understanding.
when you get
Yeah,
to that place. So it's kind of a hoax. It's like you get there because that's that place of freedom, but you're not. You actually have no freedom at all when you're there. And
What?
there's a duplicitous mind, and then you're duplicitous too. Now you have to be a certain way at the office, a different way at home. It's exhausting. So that's the biggest resisting is helping someone make the shift that really your superpowers to enable other peoples to be leaders. That's really what defines a true leader is to be influential in people's lives, to improve people's lives. When you make that shift, it's not so much about the power and position you hold as it is the influence you can have on an organization to grow. I often say it's like I wanted to be the CEO of a company years ago because I wanted the power and the prestige to achieve that, climb on the ladder. I was like, now I would want it for a large organization because I want to influence a lot of people and free them from the shackles of these environments and give them an opportunity to really step into their own greatness. So once you step into that service mentality as a leader,
Mhm.
you make the shift from being served, because that's what you were sold. You get up there, you're the king and the queen, right? Once you make the shift that really a true leader is actually of service, then that obstacle goes away. And then there's a lot of fears around, no, this doesn't work. We have to have our structure. I don't trust it's there's a lot of fears around that, but they're all tied to the same principle. And the principle is that codependency works, but it doesn't. Some people need coaching through that change. And I've discovered sometimes you bump into some traumas that have not been resolved. I'm not a therapist, but as a coach, I often will work through using some neuroscience to create new beliefs to overcome things that were holding people back. Like maybe they had a difficult childhood, and now they found themselves in a place of power and they don't want to feel like a victim by giving up that power. There's a lot of these dynamics that take place that are real issues, but working through them, getting the coaching needed to work through them, it liberates you. And then you feel this is actually true freedom. Now I can influence, I can have an impact. I'm respected as someone who's worthy to be followed. And it's not because I have a title, it's because of who I am and what I'm willing to do.
In pursuit of serving others to help everyone achieve that purpose. I want to end here with the piece of advice. I always like to get what would be really the biggest piece of advice for a leader who probably is looking at their own organization saying, well, we've become bureaucratic. I've got a bunch of managers and many, I've got people they're waiting to be told or tasked what to do. We're seeing a lot of the larger companies do this, from Zappos to Amazon, kind of decentralizing, going to more self-managed teams, decreasing the number of managers out there so that they can be more agile, they can be more flexible. We don't have to customize to the all. Let them figure it out. What would be your advice to that small to mid-sized business owner who can see some of these challenges that you've talked about caused by that centralized decision making and command and control, and they want to take that first step? What advice would you give a whether it be a founder or
Yeah.
CEO of a small to mid-sized organization?
The most important thing is to educate yourself. Start reading about self-management principles. Watch YouTube videos. There's so much content out there from companies like Corporate Rebels and World Blue. Read about and watch. There's a nice 1 hour long induction into Teal and holography and sociocracy. There's so much content out there to help yourself educate about the alternative. What does that look like? How have other companies done it? What was their experience? What was the before and after? So the most important thing is educate yourself to
Mhm.
see what could happen if you adopted this. What does it look like? What are the experiences of others? So through that, you begin to associate, you know, by watching and observing and learning with these examples. And it inspires you. It begins to plant the seed to say of what's possible. And then the other thing is engage with coaches or executives or consultants that have done this, that have actually helped companies transform in that direction because you're going to need help. It's not something you could do it's on your own. Self-management is not a self-service environment to get there. You need people to guide you in that direction who have done it, who've been there, who have figured out how to avoid the areas that could stumble you along the way. And be patient. Allow a good year, possibly more, to make that transformation. And in that process, educating everyone who's participating is going to be key too. So that's my most important encouragement is just go watch some YouTube videos on self-management principles, educate yourself. There's tons of content and books. Subscribe to the Bliss Business podcast. We talk about this, weekly. That's a great way to just educate that. You can look at my blog. I have tons of content on this. Just begin to educate yourself. Invest like in a good quarter of learning everything you possibly can about self-management principles. And then what will emerge on the other side of it is the curiosity of what could happen within your organization. And then go talk to your peers in the organization. Go talk to the employees about it. Hey, I've been reading this. What do you guys think about this? And let them surprise you. And then as you begin to do that, you begin to convince yourself this might have some merits for me and for my organization. The people like the idea, my peers like the idea. I feel like I can get some freedom back in my life from this, maybe actually be able to take a vacation once in a while because I'm giving more away. Once you make that curiosity connection, then it becomes real. And then that turns into desire. Everything starts with desire. If you don't have desire, you can't pursue anything. But to plant that desires, you have to educate yourself on what's possible.
I call it exploration.
Yes.
That alternative reality, typically change is driven by we don't want this. We want anything but this. We're in so much pain. Let this be driven by I want that. I want to create that. That's the world I want to live in. That's the company I want to lead. And that's the company I want to create for others who are attracted to it and want to be there. Tulio, thank you so much for joining me today. Such incredible, not just wisdom and advice, but the inspiration that you provide to so many others through thoughtful research, thoughtful frameworks. This is not a let's throw some stuff at the wall and see what happens. The studies are out there, the frameworks out there. I know you do workshops to help start to create these types of environments. And thank you for all the work and dedication that you have put towards this.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Until next time.